Welcome to Sundays with Jane Eyre. This is episode 6, The Long Home and a New Servitude, covering chapters 9 and 10 of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I'm Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia, and joining me today as co-host is Dr. Janine Hatter. Welcome to the show, Janine.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Did that clock go off?
It did not. Luckily,
we were wondering if her grandfather clock was going to start chiming at the opening of the show, but there you go. So I kind of wished almost that it was. So, well, welcome to all you erudite Brontesaurs and airheads out there. If you are new to the show, just a note on our format. If you're watching live on Zoom, the chat is for you to talk to each other, and please do so. But we can't follow the chat, completely during the show. So if you have questions for Janine or myself, put it in the Q&A. Look, there's one there already. And if you are watching, and we also stream live on YouTube, and I encourage everyone who's watching it there to like and subscribe and leave a comment. Liking, subscribing, and comments, even on past episodes, help us gain greater visibility and grow our audience. So let's get started today. Dr. Janine Hatter is a lecturer at the University of Hull in the UK, and her research focuses on 19th century literature, art, and culture, with a particular emphasis on popular fiction. Janine, tell us a little bit about the work that you do at Hull.
Yeah, so I'm a lecturer at Hull. I actually train postgraduates on how to do the postgraduate PhD degree. So I train them on professional, personal, and research skills. But outside of that, I run the Victorian Popular Fiction Association with a group of colleagues across the world. So that's where my literature heart is, in
Great.
Victorian popular fiction. So
And what kind of work does that organization do? Do you go out and do, is it just conferences, or do you organize virtual things, or what do you do there?
Yeah, we do all sorts. So we do have an annual conference, but then so that's full 3 days across the world. People come. And we have been doing virtual ones for the last 2 years, but we run study days, which are, kind of either a particular author or a particular topic. But we run our own journal. A colleague and myself, we also have 2 publishing book series as well. So we have a monograph series and we have an edited collection series all around the popular and Victorian, really. So lots of ways to interpret popular fiction, in particular around Victorian studies. So
yeah, and you have a particular, is it sensation fiction you have a particular interest in as well?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, which is obviously where my love of Jane Eyre kind of comes from as well, which I'd like to talk to you about, I guess. Yeah, definitely.
Good.
Sensation fiction as a really big 1860s kind of genre, springboarded from books just like Jane Eyre.
Yeah, and throughout the century, I mean, it lasts, up till, even past the turn of the century. I think you can really identify some books as very much in that sensation fiction mold. Mary Elizabeth Braddon, who's writing at the turn, that Marie Corelli is writing at the turn of the century.
Oh yeah.
Best-selling, like Marie Corelli is like outsells everybody at the end of the 19th
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the term bestseller, right, is just basically for her. She is fantastic. So yes, if you want to branch out for kind of later but they're all in conversation with Jane Eyre, right? This is the key text that kind of helps spark this kind of literature. So yeah, all in conversation with her.
And Jane Eyre, though, is a book that kind of, one of the books in before the 1860s that kind of starts to head towards this kind of fiction. And I guess maybe it's the Gothic elements in it, because Gothic certainly influences what sensation fiction becomes. I often think Gothic is this great genre that kind of has little kind of tendrils into so many different genres as they develop, especially noir. I do a lot of work with noir fiction in the 20th century, and I often see like these parallels between Gothic and noir. but right into sensation fiction too.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. Sensation fiction is such an amalgamation itself as a genre. So it clearly has Gothic influences, it clearly has crime fiction influences. You do get some realist elements as well. So it is just this, like Gothic is kind of drawn on so many different elements, like sensation takes all the Gothic and all those elements and just adds even more to it as well.
Give our audience a little nutshell. Sensation fiction. It starts and it is kind of defined by, although defining is ever good. It's features. Go ahead.
Yeah, so sensation fiction critics at the time decided this was a whole new genre that had like basically been created out of nowhere in the 1860s. 3 particular key texts. Mary Elizabeth Braddon's Lady Audley's Secret, Wilkie Collins's The Woman in White, and Mrs. Henry Wood or Ellen Wood's it's fantastic, the name's just gone out of my head, Eastland. So these kind of 3 texts, because they all came out within a year of each other, all having very sensational crime kind of angles, lots of kind of taboo subjects for the Victorian people. They all came out together, so they were kind of lumped together. In fact, some Dickens was kind of lumped in with sensation fiction as well. So he was kind of Great Expectations as the key one that was kind of put in this sensation fiction genre.
And he's publishing them. I mean, he publishes Woman in White in his, and was it all the year round, and follows it up with Great Expectations just a few issues later. So
that's it. So they're all kind of all emerged and kind of all interlinking in this genre, heavily like influenced by the new railways that had come in. So this kind of modernity aspect as well, that helps bring like the secrets, what were far away castles for the Gothic, kind of moves it all into kind of like the home, and usually around like the English countryside manor house, obviously as a setting that is coming up shortly in Jane Eyre. So this kind of countryside house, that the secrets are within the house. They're not far away in kind of other countries and castles anymore. These kind of dark secrets, family secrets come into the home, and that's really what sensation fiction is exploring. And it's all about thrilling the nerves, and like kind of this literature is meant to shock you. It's not a higher realist literature. It's not here to develop your mind. It's all about the physical sensation, the shocks and the thrills that you get from reading it, which is exactly what critics kind of condemned it for. It's not high literature, it's popular literature, it's for the masses.
Well, and so many of those books I'd love to do on this show, let me tell you. So we could just do Sensation Sundays and feature some of these novels. That'd be a lot of fun. There you go. All right, there's another idea for the future. So your Jane Eyre story then, how did you first come across Jane Eyre in your life?
So Jane Eyre was a text we did at school. So I was in year 9, and we read the first 2 chapters, I think, in class. So one class, I think we got through the first 2 chapters, which I feel is quite a lot, and then just as we were leaving the room, like I heard the teacher say, oh, and we'll skip a few chapters and then we'll come later at the book. And luckily I caught that, because I was like, I'm sorry, what? What do you mean we're not doing it like every single chapter, like you are now? Like I couldn't imagine like skipping a whole section of the book. I was just far too engrossed in Jane and her plight. So I literally had to go up to her to be like, no, you're going to have to tell me which chapter I have to read up to for next class. So luckily I'd caught that. So we only did about four lessons on Jane. Just skipped through it completely. But I always went to the end of the class and said, okay, which chapter do I have to read up to next? And because it's just too gripping. There's no way I could just do justice to the book in 4 little sections throughout. So at school, and luckily not in 4 small sections, managed to engross myself in the whole book.
That's I can't imagine. And sometimes anthologies are like that. They show sections of novels and
excerpts. Here are the key bits. I know, but it's it's
never satisfying enough for me. So can you also not start any kind of series like in the middle or something? You have to go from episode
from the start.
1.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is it. If you've got a PhD in literature, like you can't just start randomly in the middle. There's inbuilt into us to be like, no, you have to start from the beginning and work all the way through.
So what was it like discovering Jane Eyre then? And you got to read, much of it on your own then without without someone trying to teach you what it's about.
That's it.
What was that experience like?
Oh, it was just, this is the book that, was like, okay, you have to go to bed now. It's lights off time. And it's like, oh no, definitely not. Let's get the torch under the duvet and keep reading. There's no way I am not gonna put this book down. So that was my experience, really. Started at school, but then all of a sudden came to like this kind of secret reading that I had to like continue. So it was actually quite an odd mix of need to read it for school and prepare it, but also at home, this is my secret book that I'm going to kind of keep reading when no one knows I'm still up. So it was actually really, I think that added to the excitement of reading it under the covers, like, almost as like, not quite a guilty pleasure, but something I should be doing. And I think it's quite a lot of other people who have been on the show, like my age, where we all read it kind of early teens. It's, it's just the book that grabbed you because you really resonated with Jane herself. I don't want to spoil too much, obviously, of what comes up, but the sensational aspects. I think, my love of sensation is there from this text. So just as Charlotte Bronte sparked the imagination of so many authors after her, I think just like that, so many readers like gravitated to those aspects of the text as well.
Do you think it was the narrative, it's the story itself that was just so appealing and thrilling, or do you think there was a very personal connection in that? I often hear from so many people that the sentence, "Oh, I'm Jane Eyre." Like I was Jane Eyre reading this. Did you have that kind of personal, visceral connection to it? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. Even from like the very clear kind of right and wrong angle, like that's very me, that I'm quite definitive in like that kind of clear way of looking at things, which I know obviously gets muddied like the further she goes along and the more things that are thrown at her, but you can see her development of the quite clear cut to then be like, actually there's these kind of gray layers in life as well. So I do think it's a text that helped me learn to like deal with the gray areas and how you think through. And I particularly like that for this chapter, her thinking, you get the thought processes coming through, which I think is really well done in this book, particularly considering a lot of other autobiographies from the former period don't give you that in-depth look in the mind of like the person developing. A lot of it, I think for me, Robinson Crusoe is kind of in that, this is what I did and how I did it. It's quite plodding and quite episodic and plot based, whereas Jane Eyre's got a fabulous plot, but it's actually the inner motivations of the character that actually really help you associate and, for me personally, link in with her.
Good. I want to get back to that Robinson Crusoe point again when we start the chapter, because you made a really nice point about that in your notes that you sent me. And I wanted you to go on with that. So, but before we do that, and you told me you watched all the episodes, which is great. I love that. And I was wondering if there was anything chapters 1 through 8 that something that had come to you that you had wished we had talked about or want to bring to the table.
So I think having read and listened to everything, the one thing I wanted to pick up, I have to get it up to get it right.
Well, there's your book too. Show us your book. What copy do you have?
Sorry, yes.
You have the Norton Critical, but it's the last edition, right? Not the. Is it still Deborah Lutz? Who is that? No, it's before that one. Oh, it is.
Yeah. Oh no, it's Richard J. Dunn. Sorry, Richard J. Dunn. So so the book is interesting. I had different versions, but my husband is also a PhD in English literature, and our lockdown project
lots of books for you guys.
Our lockdown project was to merge our 2 bookcases together and try to get rid of duplicates, which he keeps his books pristine. I scribble all over mine.
How does he do that?
He's got notebook after notebook. He writes everything, like literally page and the quote down, whereas I'm just like scribble, highlight. So this is The one I transferred all my notes into because it's the best version for teaching, right? So because it's got all the stuff at the back as well. So I painstakingly transferred all my notes into this version so that we have one version.
Yeah, that often winds up being the copy that I'm using is the one that I had, like I wound up teaching with, and I had the most notes in. But that Norton, there's the newer one is with Deborah Lutz edited it, and Deborah Lutz will be on the show I think in December.
Nice.
I can't remember. It's November, December. I don't know. Somebody throw that in the chat. Let me know. Throw in the Q&A. Let me know. But she'll be on the show too. So, okay. So I'm sorry. You were saying I just had I love people to show their books. So
yeah, absolutely. And I do think, I mean, the cover for this one, if I zoom in, you know, this is clearly reminiscent of the Bronte picture you've got behind you. You know, it's clearly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, with the
face.
neckerchief and the way she's kind of facing exactly.
Is that a later painting someone did of that's supposed to be Charlotte, or is that just something else entirely?
It's called Waiting by John Everett Millais. So it just happens to look like her. But I think you can kind of see the links, and even the title Waiting, right? It's kind of there what's happening to Jane as she goes through life. So I did have one thing. Having read back through the first couple of chapters, and again I think reading it now after teaching it for so long, I'm still picking up the point I was talking about with sensation fiction earlier, like the Red Room scene. I've just picked out 3 little sentences that really have stood out to me reading it this time round, and how Jane Eyre is such a key influence on this entire genre of literature that really does kind of shake up you know, the Victorian literary critics, just like, you know, 15 years later or so. So it's just as she's come out of the Red Room and she's woken up. And so you were talking about the little quote that something passed her all dressed in white and vanished. I think there's key links there to like the woman in white, this kind of figure in white. And then Jane is talking about her reaction to it later on. So no severe or prolonged bodily illness followed this incident of the Red Room. It only gave my nerves a shock, of which I felt the reverberation to this day. And I think that's such a sensation fiction element here. It's the physical shock of the event, and the reverberations just continue. And I do think that this is just sensation fiction. This is exactly in those kind of 2 sentences. And then she goes on, yes, Miss Reed, to you I owe some fearful pangs of mental suffering. And that's, so this kind of idea of this vanishing figure in white, the shocked nerves, and this mental suffering. This is just sensation fiction. In those 3 sentences right there, that is the entire genre condensed, springboarded from this book. So that's what I wanted to flag up as just an extra thing to think about as you go along, just how amazing this book has been in inspiring so many other things. Ed, I have you on mute.
Sorry. And this plays up, of course, throughout the novel, that this you know, thrilling, you know, what's her language again?
The nerves of shock.
Yeah.
It gave the nerves of shock and mental suffering.
Yeah, it continues to play up through the rest of this, especially after we get to Thornfield. And
exactly. So it's resonant all throughout the book. And then I just think this book as a whole resonates across the century, and obviously beyond into the 20th and 21st as well.
Mm-hmm. Somebody had sent a question in, or more of a comment. Susan had written, just became aware of music. I'm heading off in another direction. Just became aware of music by John Williams, played by the Boston Pops on the Pops Britannia album in 1989. Jane Eyre to Thornfield at Lowood and others. Is there a stage production? Just wanted to let you know of this connection. I think that John Williams music is from one of the movies. But I can't remember which one Williams did the music for, one of the Jane Eyre films.
No, I can't.
If anybody wants to look that up on the Google or whatever search engine you're using, that's how we find out information these days. There's no use arguing facts, because hey, I can just look up the facts. So
yeah.
Somebody look up where that John Williams is and let me know, and I'll mention it. Great. Well, today we have chapters 9 and 10. And just to lead us up to that, the last two chapters, we have the punishments of Jane and Helen. Jane, shamed by Brocklehurst in front of the school. And Helen had to wear the slattern. Well, she's punished, and then she also has to wear the slattern on her head, on her forehead. And Jane throws it away. I love that. But also we had Brocklehurst's great anxiety over the girl's hair, which I think there's a funny throwback to that in the beginning of this chapter. And Jane and Helen have tea and seed cake with Miss Temple, which was very nice. So just before we get started, and we'll have Bessie come up later too, but we could talk about that later. Helen in this, we have talked about as this obviously a saintly figure, obviously a figure inspired by for Charlotte by her own older sister Maria, especially. But what I find interesting is the spiritual advice that Helen gives to Jane. Seems very solid for Helen and her life.
Yes.
But not necessarily for Jane, and Jane notices that. Any take on that?
I think it's obviously where Helen is at this point in her life. She clearly knows she's been ill for a long time, and she is preparing herself, I think, for her end. And while that's where she is there, she is trying to prepare Jane for life without her, but Jane's just not in a place to understand that or accept even the possibility that that's going to happen. I think that's why Jane is she's not listening. Doesn't want to engage with that, because I think that's either her unconscious or consciously is like, I just cannot see life without her friend with her. So I do feel that there's that's why Jane is so very not listening, not in a place to take this on board. And I think she will reflect, because she is quite a reflective person, is Jane. She will reflect on this.
Yeah. All right, good. Well, we'll get to this then. It sounds like that's the direction we're headed. We'll get to this then when we hit there. Somebody says it was actually the 1970 Jane Eyre movie with George C. Scott and Susanna York. Had the music by John Williams. Thanks, Laura.
We got an Emmy for it.
Yeah, I think that was it released? It might have been released theatrically in England, but then was TV in America, so or something like that. But anyway, thanks for that. So I hadn't realized that John Williams made the movie for that, music for that. So he really becomes much more famous later, John Williams, with Star Wars and on. All righty. And let's get started with chapter 9. Spring comes to Lowood. Kind of opening here. The text is, but the privations, or rather the hardships of Lowood lessened, spring drew on. She was indeed already come. Spring has come in already. The frosts of winter had ceased. Her feet that were, destroyed by the weather in January are now healing. We get the gentler breathings of April. And then I love this line in the first paragraph: the thought that hope traversed them at night and left each morning brighter traces of her steps. I mean, from what we've had at Lowood so far, this is this seems pretty nice. I mean, this is gorgeous language that she's using to describe spring coming in. But it has, and it has, obvious, thematic, metaphorical, figurative, meanings, and always in literature, spring coming in, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is it, right? Spring, we're into the new year. It's just this hope, eternal, we are in the cyclical process, and life is going to get better. We do have this kind of quite idyllic start to the chapter, which helps Jane have a perhaps more happier, kind of better outlook on life. there's so much, if you're thinking Wordsworth's poetry and, literature is steeped in this idea of spring, rejuvenation, regrowth. And, it just, for my book, it lasts one page. That's it.
Yeah.
You get one page of happiness. This idea of the water flowing and this, really detailed bits about nature, that the water comes first due to the thawing after winter, and then the rejuvenation and the plants grow. And this idea that Lowood shook loose its tresses, it's
What a
shaking
great
off all the
line.
bad things.
I know.
Gorgeous line.
Especially after the chapters with Brocklehurst, it being in such a panic over the hair of these girls. And this is and that's the metaphor that Bronte uses here, well, through Jane, that to shake loose their tresses. So makes me miss my long hair.
Freedom's come, that's it. And then literally straight away after this, it's like fog and pestilence come.
Yeah.
Straight back down. There is no happiness here. You have a bit of hope and then it's fully taken away again.
Yeah. Cue gloomy music, pestilence. The forest dell is, the fog and fog bred pestilence. Creeps into the asylum, breathes typhus through its crowded schoolroom and dormitory, and then the place becomes a hospital, more than a school. Pestilence too, and even the way she describes it really sums up the idea that they had of how disease was spread at the time. This miasma, theory of disease, like germ theory, that bacteria spreads disease. That's not to the late 19th century, like after 1880. But now people still are firmly in this disease is spread through. Miasma is the word for pollution. I think it's Greek for pollution. But it's disease spread through bad air. Basically, if it smells bad, it's disease and it's going to kill us or infect us. And spreading, people thought that about cholera until it was discovered that was coming through the water. But typhus, typhus is actually spread by lice and by fleas. But they don't, they don't have the even the scientific technology to examine those things, so they don't know that yet. But so that's where this is disease just comes through these marshlands that smell badly at certain times of the year, which is ironic too. Like it's spring, life, but in this case, because of where they're located, life brings, pestilence. Yeah,
this is it. It's like they've woken up from hibernation, but what's woken up with them is this lurking underlying disease as well. So it was always there, but while life is springing up and the greenery is springing up, this is the chance for the pestilence to spring up as well.
Yeah. And the children she talks about are debilitated already from from everything they've had to go through. Semi-starvation and neglected colds had predisposed most of the pupils to receive infection. And this is very true anyway, and that if you're in very poor condition, you are going to be much more susceptible to suffering greater effects from disease as you get it, because typhus, it's coming through, fleas or lice. You're going to get it anyway, but it's going to be much more deadlier because of the condition that you're already in. 45 out of the 80 girls lay ill at one time.
I know, this is half your population down. So I think again here, you talked about it before, this is the Dickensian aspect coming through here, isn't it? This is the grim reality that people need to know about. So and
very much the reality for Charlotte Bronte, because she went through this as a child at 8 years old. We mentioned this before too, at Cowan Bridge School that she went to. They had a typhus epidemic, and some of the children died. And this is when her sister Mariah was ill, but actually with tuberculosis, not typhus. But they weren't quite sure then. And she goes home, dies, 11 years old. Then Elizabeth, the other older sister, she's 10 years old. She gets sick. She's sent home too. Charlotte and Emily come home to see, at least they're there present when their sister Elizabeth dies, and then they're sent back to school to finish out the semester. So it's already paid for. May as well go back. But that, and it was quite scandalous at the time, at least for the families that were at that school, that they were not taking care of the children. The food was really bad, and they themselves had great. They tried to reform the conditions at Cowan Bridge after this had happened. So there was something I tried to share a couple times. I kept wanting to share it, but I never got to it. Both weeks is this. We have the records of like the register records from the Cowan Bridge School. I mean, they exist. We don't have them. I think they're at the parsonage. I'm not sure. But anyway, they were published in the 19th century, like the kind of little snapshots of each child coming into the school. And the Brontes at Charlotte entered August 10, 1824. This is what the record reads: writes indifferently, ciphers a little and works neatly, knows nothing of grammar, geography, history, or accomplishments, altogether clever of her age, but knows nothing systematically. Left school June 1st, 1825, governess, they have next to her name. Like that's what she later became, at least when they filled this in, because she was a governess at some point.
Yeah.
But it reads like Jane coming in, so doesn't know much. She's, she doesn't, and Jane goes through this in earlier chapters, that she has to learn these kind of systems and things. For Emily, it says, reads very prettily and works a little. I mean, she's 5, and 3/4 years old, it says. Left June 1st when Charlotte did. Subsequent career, governess. And then Mariah's is there, and Elizabeth's. Mariah's age 10. It says reads tolerably, writes pretty well, ciphers a little, works badly. Very little of geography or history. Has made some progress in reading French, but knows nothing of the language grammatically. Left February 14, 1825 in ill health and died. For Elizabeth, it was Elizabeth. We even have a little medical information. It said age 9, vaccinated, scarlet fever, whooping cough, reads little, writes pretty well, ciphers none, works very badly. So Patrick's kids were like really, they were on them right away, is that they were not good students. Knows nothing of grammar, geography, history, or accomplishments, left in ill health, died in decline. So
they've got the brains though, right? They know the smartness and the aptitude there. They've just had no kind of formal schooling. Which
is why Patrick was sending them there, because he obviously was not good at this, at teaching his children things. And certainly, his wife, their mother had already died, so they didn't have the guidance then. But he needed someone to educate his children, because he was obviously not capable of doing that thing. He would have not survived in the pandemic at all. His kids would have, gone to, his kids would have all been sent home, and they just wouldn't have learned anything.
Well, they'll just go out for long walks, right? Like that's
there you go. And who says that wasn't terrible for them? So, we talk about how, they didn't know enough. And Charlotte, through Jane, talks about this, that, she has to learn everything. But the education you got walking the moors was just as valuable as the formal education that you wind up getting. But reading those things too, just another way of emphasizing how this whole Lowood School experience is Charlotte's experience as well. Especially, then typhus hits Cowan Bridge. She puts it in her novel, and then we'll get to, Helen in a little bit. The few paragraphs in here, it's I love the opening of this paragraph, because it sounds like a Poe story. It sounds like the opening of a Poe story. While disease had thus become an inhabitant of Lowood, and death its frequent visitor, while there was gloom and fear within its walls, while its rooms and passages steamed with hospital smells, the drug and the pastille striving vainly to overcome the effluvia of mortality. If you had given me that at blank, I would have said Poe. So I wonder. Anyway, but that's the mood she's setting. She's setting that gloom. Everything is, it pays everything is contributing to this gloomy, death-like, atmosphere. The effluvia of mortality was my second choice for title for this episode. So
I mean, this is it. Spring has come and gone, right? This is it. We are now straight back, as you say, into the doom and gloom.
And then ironically, the rest of that sentence is that bright May shone unclouded over the bold hills and beautiful woodlands. So I love that part of this chapter too, that she's, sure, it might be all beautiful out here, people, readers, but it's people are dying.
But that's it. Children are dying. They're not meant to live in these conditions. And this is what happens when you put children in these conditions.
And the benefits of this for at least Jane, because she doesn't become ill, and the other kids who aren't ill, is they get to ramble in the woods. And the other benefit is Brocklehurst never comes to the school, driven away by the fear of infection. Another reminder of the kind of, how he, talks the Christian game, but doesn't practice it. He's fleeing the disease.
And again, obviously it's her way to comment and critique people in these positions of power, right? Like mismanaging the money, misspending, on food. As you say, clearly starved the kids over winter, and they are just not physically strong enough to withstand any form of disease or pestilence that comes, and just the hypocrisy of himself as the manager of the school.
And now the ones who are, not sick are getting to eat well. There's, and the person, they're, because the woman in charge of the larders or whatever, she flees too, and someone replaces her, and she just doesn't know the rule. Like, oh, just give the children food. Of course. So she says, we dine sumptuously. And of course it's sumptuously for her, it's again, a thick slice of bread and cheese, piece of cold pie. This is a feast for the kids here.
Better than the burnt porridge, definitely.
So burnt porridge is gone. We get this strange moment now of introducing another character, but who doesn't play any bearing on this at all. And I find this a bit of, as we're, obviously as we're kind of really, talking about, the details and really annotating this. It's when you do that, it's easy to see these moments where I'm not sure this is even necessary to bring in this character. There's an interesting point about it, I think, about the kind of person that she is, but nothing gets used from this. And this is Marianne Wilson, right?
Marianne, just shrewd, an observant personage whose society I took pleasure in, partly because she's witty and original, and because she puts Jane at ease. And like you say, that's it. They go off on their long walks. They're the people who go off across and just eat separately from everybody else, but you get no sense of Marianne as a person in her own writing, which I think is really unusual for Bronte's writing, because she does usually give quite rounded figures.
It is, but I mean, as a first published novel, I'm totally like, there's going to be a couple moments where I think that you've begun something that you didn't quite form or finish. That's fine. But this one stood out for me in this reading. And if you had asked me before, I never would have remembered. That there was a Marianne Wilson.
No, she had a second friend at school. It's all about Helen.
Somebody commented, I wonder if some of it might have been edited out, which is true. But it was such a short process of her writing this novel anyway. It certainly wasn't like a complete draft and then let's cut. It was. I imagine it was the kind of thing that comes out as you're writing, and then it's there, and then you leave it there, because people did that then. We're reading first drafts of novels in a sense. So, but the one detail about her is that she had a turn for narrative. That Marianne Wilson liked to tell stories, and whether they were gossip stories or just telling her any kind of amusing story, that's something that Jane likes, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jane is somebody who is just soaking in, right? She's like a sponge at this point. She's just the education, stories. I mean, this is what she's learned from Bessie, right?
Yeah.
This is what Kathleen was talking about.
The best thing about Bessie is that she tells stories. So she's found somebody to replace that kind of lack of storytelling in her life now, because this is what what she draws on, what she thrives for, is this storytelling, swapping stories, and just this entertainment that's not hard education that's being drummed into her. It's the light entertainment that really bonds here. Or the kind of stories that Helen will tell, or the kind of, because she's inspired by Helen, and then she specifically compares her in this, and where meantime was Helen Burns paragraph, where it's Marianne Wilson tells me the amusing stories, but Helen was qualified to give those who enjoyed the privilege of her converse a taste of far higher things.
And this, to me, this is the Marianne is popular literature. She's the popular storyteller. Mm-hmm. Helen is your realist, kind of. Yeah. She's got the theological, higher aims. She's the person trying to pull Jane up into this higher realm. And Marianne, for me, is the popular literature storyteller down here. So I do think the two work quite nicely as a contrast.
But you can't have Helen all the time. Like if Helen is your sole source of, it would be, it wouldn't be boring in any sense, especially because, she's so inspiring, but it would be a lot of pressure.
Yeah. This is her kind of almost like the Shakespeare's, comedic interlude, isn't it? Yeah. This is the light relief for Jane coming through. So I think
can't you just tell how Jesus made the water and the wine and dance at the wedding, please, just once? So he had a little fun now, so but this is and it leads to this interesting moment here again where we have the reader, and I always love when the narrator addresses here, true reader, I knew and felt this about the difference between Helen and Marianne and what she provided for her. And she says, read that first sentence there.
True reader, and I knew and felt this, and though I am a defective being with many faults and few redeeming points, yet I never tired of Helen Burns, nor ever ceased to cherish for her a sentiment of attachment as strong, tender, and respectful as any that ever animated my heart. Gorgeous.
It is. And at first that though I am a defective being, that that humility that Jane feels, partly because she's been abused, but partly also that I think perhaps to the instruction of Helen, that we are we're not perfect, and we make all kinds of mistakes, and we have to own up to that in order to be happy. But that attachment that they have there is the ideal friend, attachment, strong, tender, respectful, they are. It's really nice language she uses for that friend.
I think it's the animated my heart as well, because she's clearly not had this at all with the Reeds. Mm-hmm. Nobody has animated Jane's heart in her life before. Then Helen comes along, so you can see again, it's a physical reaction. It's kind of this physical, emotional connection she has with Helen.
Yeah,
really, changes kind of her as a person because it's such a deep connection.
Yeah. Tracy had a nice comment here, and she sent us that I think about Marianne Wilson. I think it's important to show that Jane is not a complete loner, does seek out companionship when she can. Marianne makes Jane seem like a normal person who craves friendship. Absolutely, but yeah, but she's not a character. Like, we don't get to really meet her or know her. She's she's something that makes a point in this, like that, or the or the Jane like storytellers, or just a contrast with Helen. And the only quibble I have is that Bronte doesn't then bring her in and make her a character. So
yeah, but I can see Mary Lou said in the chat as well, like, Jane's not going to be deterred from her loyalty and affection to Helen, despite her shiny new friend, and who hasn't experienced something like this. And again, Mary Lou is just saying this is how timeless this book is. Like, the contrast between the different friendships in your life is so true to life, that she can capture that just in that one character who comes up almost just in a couple of paragraphs, and you can kind of see these overarching friendships and friendship types come through.
Right. Well, I'm going to give my little mid-break message before we jump back into here, and tell everybody that we bring Sundays with Jane Eyre to you for free. So if you would like to support the Rosenbach through donation, you can do so at our website. And since this novel was published in 1847, we're asking for donations of $18.47 to support the show. And I would like to thank all of those who've made a donation of 1847, and also even greater or lesser amounts, because everything helps. And I'd like to thank Kathleen A. in Collingswood, New Jersey, David G. in Ardmore, PA, Mark D. in Willingboro, New Jersey, Doris W. in Leonia, New Jersey, Melissa T. in Stratford, New Jersey, Susan S. in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. We got a lot of Jersey for this one. Haley H. in King of Prussia, PA, Maureen B. in Belleville, New Jersey, and Molly H. in Berkeley, California. And then the Philly people, David W., Gregory B., Helene C., Nicole P., Melissa N., Amy L., all from Philly, all made donations very recently. Thank you very much. But you could also become a member to support the Rosenbach. Members of the Rosenbach get free and exclusive access to some programs, plus 10% off of any of our reading courses, and 50% off of any paid Rosenbach programs. And we have a bunch of new memberships among our Airhead audience that I want to thank. Patricia C. joined from Philadelphia, and Tammy Y. joined from Philadelphia. Daniel B. from Yardley, PA joined the Rosenbach. Melissa N. from Philadelphia, PA. And Maureen B. from Belleville, New Jersey, all joined the Rosenbach. Thank you very much. Your support helps us bring programs like this. It helps us bring our collection to life. So thank you all for joining and for donating. We also have brand new Sundays with Jane Eyre merchandise, mugs, t-shirts, and stickers with our fantastic logo on them that was created by Anuhea Ramsey. Buy them while supplies last. And a couple people have, and they were, the mail finally, got to people, and a couple people on our Facebook group posted pictures of them in their shirts. Thank you so much. I love to see that. And I encourage you all, share your pictures on social media of your Sundays with Jane Eyre swag, and don't forget, tag the Rosenbach and Sundays with Jane Eyre. And remember, everyone, we have an official bookseller for Sundays with Jane Eyre, a novel ID on Passyunk, where you can buy editions of Jane Eyre, and also any of the Brontean books we mention on our show can be ordered on their website. So visit them. Next week, we will not have a show because it's Halloween, and that's my holiday. So I'm taking Halloween off, and enjoying the holiday. Do you celebrate Halloween, Janine?
Oh yeah, good. Definitely. I mean, my husband and I both gothicists at heart, really.
Oh, so yeah, there you go.
Definitely.
So it's one of the things.
Jane Eyre costume,
A friend in France, Adrian, who watches the show sometimes. I'm not sure if he's here today. I was asking him about Halloween in France, and he said, "Oh yeah, a while ago there was nothing there, but now it's all kind of come in, and it's mostly this American influence of celebrating holiday." And I feel like there's a good American influence in the world, celebrating Halloween. So trick or treating, all that. I love it. So but I'll be off, and we'll return the following week on November 7th. And my co-host for the show will be Finola Austin, who is the author of the novel Bronte's Mistress. Have you read this yet, Janine?
I haven't, not read that one yet.
Yeah, this is a novel about Branwell Bronte's affair with Lydia Robinson, the original Mrs. Robinson, and it's told from her point of view, and quite fascinating. I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to have Finola on the show. She will be here November 7th for the next show. So, back to the chapters. Helen was ill at present for some weeks. She had been removed from my sight. Helen is, taken away. She's kept alone with Miss Temple, and not and not allowed to mix with everybody else. So because Helen has consumption, and it's not typhus, and she's getting special care from Miss Temple, and that keeps her from Jane's company. She's sometimes taken into the garden, but Jane can't go out with her. And then again, we have another thing. I don't know. Mary Lou mentioned maybe she edited something. Now I'm really thinking maybe she edited something out of this, because now we get a story where one evening in the beginning of June, I had stayed out very late with Marianne in the wood. As usual, we separate ourselves from the others. We wandered far. We lost our way. We had to go to a lonely cottage where a man and woman lived who looked after a herd of half-wild swine that fed on the mass in the wood. Like, this is leading to something, right? No, it's not. They're like, oh yeah, go home that way. And nothing happens to this. But this is like this is like a ramble on the moors for Charlotte.
This is a teaser for later on as well. Like, she's learning to ramble on the moors, can't figure her way, hints coming up.
Yeah.
But it's also this idea that I think for this, you can get the sense of just how torn she is, that she's been ripped away from Helen as well. Like, she's free to go further and do different things. But you can see the contrast in, like, she goes and she does plant something in the garden, right? She's there trying to grow and plant. So she's got this need for this friendship that's been taken from her to kind of, rejuvenate and grow and find other ways to express herself. And obviously everything she's feeling. So I love this idea that she stays behind for a few minutes when she comes back off the moors and plants something in the garden.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because she fears like these roots will wither if left till the morning. So she's got this caring, this tending, nurturing nature in her. So I think it's just a really nice way again to show just how torn she has been without Helen near her.
That's a great observation. I'd missed that. Did not have it highlighted in my text. So I love that. Plant in my garden a handful of roots I dug up in the forest. Yeah. So and right away, this is when she finally starts to realize what's going on with Helen. How sad to be lying now on a sick bed and to be in danger of dying. And then my mind made its first earnest effort to comprehend what had been infused to it concerning heaven and hell. And she's thinking about, what's going to happen after death. And then it's on to Helen, and she asks, and she, the doctor says she's not going to be here long. And this is when you read that paragraph there, this phrase uttered in my hearing.
Yeah, this phrase uttered in my hearing yesterday would have only conveyed the notion that she was about to be removed to Northumberland, to her own home. I should not have suspected that it meant she was dying, but I knew instantly now. It opened clear on my comprehension that Helen Burns was numbering her last days in this world, and that she was going to be taken to the region of spirits, if such region there were. I experienced a shock of horror, then a strong thrill of grief, then a desire, a necessity to see her, and I asked in what room she lay.
Going through a process. I love that, that Bronte takes us through the process that she goes through in this. First of all, just thinking about a couple paragraphs before, thinking about, heaven and hell and the other world and what happens after death. And then as she mentions Helen, and then it all kind of comes together, and she goes through that string there: horror, grief, and then desire to see her.
Because it's the abstract, right? It's everything Helen's been talking about in the abstract this is now what it is in reality.
Yeah.
And it just physically hits her. I think it's really powerful that you get this absolute kind of reaction. Jane's reaction to it is so well done. And this really, way she says, I first actually had to stop and think about this.
Mm-hmm.
She can't do anything else. She has to concentrate on thinking this through. And I think this is one of the first times we see her stop and think it through. And this is going to be a kind of repeated motif as we go through, that she really has to stop and concentrate on things to figure out what's happening.
And we even get it in the next chapter when she realizes that she wants to leave, and that she takes us through that process. Yeah. Well, she realizes she has to see Helen right away now, that she knows what's going on. And she sneaks out to find her. An odor of camphor and burnt vinegar warned me when I came near the fever room. Again, this is, the miasma theory. So if you want to battle bad smells, you put, smells of something that's not bad or something healthy in the air. But then she says, I must see Helen. I must embrace her before she died. I must give her one last kiss, exchange with her one last word. And she goes to Miss Temple's room. I love here, as she comes up to the room, a light shone through the keyhole. And very visual too. I can picture this little scene. Jane is coming across.
What's interesting about this is Jane is the one in the corridor, looking into the room, which you need to remember for later on, because later on she's the person inside the room. Yeah. And the light's flickering past her outside. So this is it. She is the person with the agency this time, walking through, because she comes back to she's indisposed to hesitate. She's got these impatient impulses. Her soul and senses are quivering. It's a physical need, not just an emotional need to see Helen. Her whole body is resonating, that she's got so many emotions. It's like literally kind of shaking her. She has to physically go and see Helen.
My eye saw Helen and feared defying death. So she's preparing us too for what we're coming into here. And then when she sees her, I saw her face pale, wasted, but quite composed. And can it be you, Jane? She asked in her own gentle voice. And I thought, she is not going to die. They are mistaken. She could not speak and look so calmly if she were. One of the things I like about this is that it's not that fetishization of the dying, beautiful young girl here. She's still pale and wasted. It's her being composed, and it's her being kind of lucid that leads Jane to think that, like, oh, you're not going to die, as opposed to so many stories we get in the 19th century where you'd come in on her and she'd be like, and she was radiant and her eyes were glowing, and some of that is taken from real, the facts of people dying from tuberculosis and how they would get flushed and look a little kind of brighter, but often fetishized and fetishized, whatever the word is that I'm
fetishized. The pale skin, but then you have the kind of red glow, and obviously the coughing up blood, and this kind of the vampiric links to TB as well.
The beautiful the beautiful woman dying young, the pose is the most poetical topic in the world, that kind of thing. We don't get that here, and I think especially we don't get that here because Charlotte Bronte has been through this. Charlotte Bronte understands what this is, and is not going to make it. And like, the beauty of Helen's death is going to be about how she's still so strongly connected to Jane, and the emotion between them and their heart's connection in a sense. So that's what we have here. And she got in her crib. We've had this mentioned before, crib, and it seems that It's just for Bronte, it's just children's better cribs, period. Like, well, I had this talk earlier on. I was trying to think, like, is she trying to give us some message, especially in the old Reed house, that Jane was kept in a definitely a smaller bed than the others? But I think
it's just, to designate that
for Charlotte Bronte, it's just a child's bed as a crib, period. So she kisses her. And then this lovely exchange here. Why don't you read that? I came to see you, Helen, and then down to my last home.
I came to see you, Helen. I heard you were very ill, and I could not sleep till I had spoken to you. You came to bid me goodbye then. You are just in time, probably. Are you going somewhere, Helen? Are you going home? Yes, to my long home, my last home.
Oh boy, that's
no, Helen. Like, I love how the questions suddenly changed to an exclamation mark there. Like, oh.
And then she says, well, I tried to devour my tears. Another, wonderful, phrase from Bronte, but that long home always stops me. Because we don't use that idiom anymore. We don't use that metaphor anymore, although you can find it throughout literature up, I think, through the 19th century, but it seems to have gone out of fashion, that idea of the long home as a poetic or euphemistic way of referring to, after death, where you'll go, heaven, most likely. And so I was really looking it up this time, and it goes all the way back to Old English, to Anglo-Saxon. And there's several examples of the long home in Old English poetry. There was one in Cynewulf, who's a 9th century Anglo-Saxon poet, wrote mostly religious themed poetry. And he has this one piece called The Fate of the Apostles, which is about what befell all the apostles after Jesus leaves. And at one point it's in there, it's Charles Kennedy, great translation of it is, how great a need have I of gentle friends upon my way, when I seek out alone my long home, that unknown dwelling place, and leave behind the body this bit of earth to be a spoil and solace unto worms. I seek out alone my long home. The Old English is Thona ish shea lang naham. Thona ish shea lang naham. And you find that lang naham in Old English poetry and several what survived. I imagine it was probably used a lot more. But it's like it goes way back, and people are still using it, in Charlotte, especially in the 19th century, the long home. That's, and I love Charles Kennedy's, unknown dwelling place. And it sounds like that's a passage that Helen would have said right now. So, and also, that I chose this Cynewulf passage is that because it's how great a need have I of gentle friends upon my way. That what is important is in that passage, in that poem, that Old English poem, is it's not all about like, oh, I'm going to die and be with God, so none of this matters. I'm going to die and go off to my long home, but I need my friends along the way. And that is just what's going on in this, in their lives with Helen and Jane.
Because it's about, obviously we needed to have them have this moment together again. Like, they couldn't have left it where they just didn't see each other ever again, because you need Jane and Helen to have this moment so that Jane can see Helen be so composed as she knows she's dying, and just to have that contrast with Jane as well, devour my tears. Jane's always in extremes, always one way or the other, and she's learning from Helen to be composed, to contain yourself, to have the control over yourself in very emotional, distraught situations. So this conversation is just question after question for Jane, isn't it? It's just wants to know more. And you just see Helen's completely calm and actually tends Jane, like Helen's the one that's like, oh, Jane, you're going to get cold, put the blanket over you. Like, she's just forever looking after other people, as Jane is in distraught, asking questions, cannot fathom what's happening. So again, I think it's just a really beautiful moment for the two of them together, highlighting them and what they get from each other, like what makes their friendship so strong.
Absolutely. And yeah, and that will continue more so as we go through here. But Laura just sent me a message that in Lord of the Rings, the Rohirrim use long home at least twice. And like, yeah, I should have known. I should have figured that I had seen it in Tolkien. Laura is in my Tolkien group too, so I'm so happy now. I gotta look it up and get those passages out. But anyway, the Jane, your little feet are bare, lie down and cover yourself with my quilt. You know, Helen's, as you're saying, I mean, Helen's, you know, connecting with her, providing comfort for Jane here. And I did so. She put her arm over me and I nestled close to her. And then Helen gives this, you know, she's still whispering, you know, she gives her kind of spiritual guidance and lets her know, you know, what's going on, answer these questions that Jane, some of the questions that Jane has. But I'm very happy when you hear that I am dead, you must be sure and not grieve. There's nothing to grieve about. I have only, I leave no one to regret me much. I have only a father and he is lately married and will not miss me. I have thought she was an orphan, but she's not.
No. She's been abandoned, kind of like Jane has, really,
just
like you know.
I just thought, did I misremember that? I thought she said she was an orphan earlier, but I guess she didn't. And I, you know, but I just assumed that, which is what I think maybe was intended in the text, to assume that. Like when they talked about her father had taught her some Latin, I just thought, well, he must have died after that. But he has apparently abandoned her. And then Jane is asking where, and then so I'm going to God, and Jane's like, where's God? What is God? I mean, the most basic questions, but Jane hasn't really had the instruction for this.
She's just never seen it, right?
Yeah.
Like she's never seen a good presence anywhere, like just trying to comprehend why God would take somebody so angelic, so pure, so good, just does not make sense.
And she says, and shall I see you again, Helen, when I die? And then Helen's like, you know, of course, you will come to the same region. How comfortable I am. The last fit of coughing has tired me a little. I feel as if I could sleep, but don't leave me, Jane. I like to have you near me. I'll stay with you, dear Helen. No one shall take me away. Are you warm, darling? Yes. Good night, Jane. Good night, Helen. She kissed me and I her, and we both soon slumbered. They just want to be with each other, and they get to be at the final moment here. And then we discover Jane as she just remembers somebody picking her up, and she's told later, Miss Temple, on returning to her own room at dawn, had found me laid in the little crib, my face against Helen Burns' shoulder, my arms around her neck. I was asleep, and Helen was dead. And I can't help but think that part of this is that, you know, Charlotte Bronte gives Jane the experience with Helen that Charlotte didn't have with her own revered older sister, the sister they all revered and talked about later as so angelic, Maria.
Yeah, absolutely. This is it's their kind of reunion is to bring peace for Helen. It gives Jane more questions, but it's absolutely her writing her goodbye. And you can just really feel the emotions coming through, and how, of course, the very last paragraph, Helen's not forgotten. Like, you know, the overarching elder Jane narration comes in to say, you know, while for 15 years the grave was a grassy mound, now it's got the marble tablet marks the spot. This idea that she's never going to forget Helen. This is a permanent marker of their friendship, of what she's learned and their connection between each other, and absolutely as a goodbye to her sisters.
And the word inscribed on her, the resurgam, I shall rise again, inscribed there is obviously, you know, in you know, it's her Christianity that she is, you know, risen again to be with Christ. But it's also operates in a very real way too, in that, you know, she is still living with, you know, 15 years later, she's still with Jane. and that she can remember her, and that she's still present for her.
Well, that's it, because Helen's now always going to be this angelic figure. She's never going to change. She's never going to grow up. Like, she's captured in this one moment in Jane's mind forever. She's not going to change. So it's just always there as the marker of the good things. This is like, you can see that Helen's going to be the kind of angel in Jane's ear all the way through the narrative. I think so. I can see Jodie saying, are we to think Jane put the grave marker later on Helen's grave? I think that's the implication here.
That she was responsible for that. Yeah. We move on to chapter 10, and this is where we get an interesting point. And I want to ask you about Robinson Crusoe and this kind of idea about autobiography. And she says, this is not to be a regular autobiography. I'm only bound to invoke memory where I know her responses will possess some degree of interest, because she's jumped over. She's like, all right, now I've given you, the first, 10 years of my life, and now I'm going to skip 8 and bring you up. And as she's addressing the reader here, that she's telling us this is the kind of autobiography you're reading. And you had an interesting note that you sent to me about experiments in the novel and first person narration. And I really want to hear how you connect it to Robinson Crusoe.
Because I say thank you to Charlotte Bronte for recognizing that you, in an autobiography, you do not have to do every day of your entire life in the autobiography. So
as Crusoe does.
Robinson Crusoe is a step-by-step, day-by-day narrative of obviously his shipwreck and him living on the island. And this is the first text I read at university, and I almost walked off my English literature course, but I think they set it deliberately. Because you have all of this narrative about him on the island, and then he decides to write it down. So you get a repeat of everything that's already happened as he writes it down. So that's how I link it to Robinson Crusoe, because you literally get, here is a beautiful narration. Helen's gone, her childhood at Lowood is now it's insignificant. Like, the most significant part of her childhood is over, so she's just going to skip 8 years. Like, it doesn't matter. There's nothing else formative for Jane in that period. So she skips it. I was like, yes, this is exactly how a fantastic first person narration, as you were talking about, the novel is still in development here. So to skip 8 years, I mean, we skipped 3 months in the last chapter, 8 years here, it's a massive time skip, and actually really helps the first person narrative and the autobiographical form develop as a novel convention here. And
lets the reader know, like, because this is a pact. We talked about this, maybe with Lauren, or I can't remember who we were talking about, but there's a pact with the reader here that this narrator, by constantly addressing the reader and letting them know what's going on in this novel, that's not something that usually happens later in novels, and hasn't happened in some novels before then. That's all secret, like, it's not put out there on the page. But I often wonder if that's one of the reasons that people connect so strongly with this book, is because the narrator is constantly connecting with you, and even in little ways like this.
Yeah, absolutely. It tells you exactly what's happening. You know where you stand. And I know you've talked about the unreliable narrator, but overall, I think Jane is a very kind of reliable narrator overall. You know exactly where you are. And because you know exactly what she's thinking and feeling, that's how you just immerse yourself in Jane and what happens. And I just think the narrative setup is the key part of that.
Well, we have the because of the typhus epidemic and everything that happened, now suddenly public attention is on the school, and it gets reformed. The food gets better. Brocklehurst has to, he only has a say now in what happens with the management of the money, the funds of the school. There's a committee that does this, and the school thus improves and became in time a truly useful and noble institution. That we get the reform here that I don't know, that usually doesn't happen. Usually it's you know, it's just tragedy in the novel, and then but here actually the school gets better, and it's again, it's this wishful thinking on Charlotte Bronte's part that I'm going to make it better. Now I know Cowan Bridge School did improve too. Maybe she's just relating that kind of aspect about it. But
I was annoyed that Brocklehurst did not get his full comeuppance.
Yeah, he doesn't get a comeuppance, but he's yeah. Well, I certainly would like to see that, but yeah.
And it's specifically linked to his wealth and his family connections, so you can see the point that Bronte is making again here. But she's still described literally the sentence after you've said the school thus improved became a timely and useful noble institution. I remained an inmate of its walls. Even the renewed building and the renewed school, she sees herself still trapped. Prison is this kind of prison for herself and her person. And I'm going to skip a couple of paragraphs. She's got this idea of an inmate in her mind as well. So she's physically and mentally trapped kind of in this school. It's kind of, that's how much of an impact and how downtrodden she's been at this school.
She calls it a prison ground, or when she looks out on the boundary of Rock and Heath, seem prison ground, exile limits. That's what this place has become. I mean, that's what it started from her, obviously. Even with the reform, then you're saying it's still, prison for her. Or is it because then she says I altered, and it's because Miss Temple leaving. Miss Temple gets married and leaves, and then she realizes that things are different now. Is it a prison again, or was it always a prison for those 8 years? I guess is what I'm thinking. I don't know if we get the evidence in the text.
To be honest, I think it's the way she says I remained an inmate. It suggests that she's always been an inmate to me. And as you say, this Miss Temple leaving changes everything. And again, you get that fabulous insight into her mind, how she's working it through, and how Miss Temple has left and taken that solace with her. All of the calm she feels like it was from Miss Temple. So there's this absolute fundamental change in her again, because when Miss Temple leaves, the calm leaves, the solace leaves. Yeah. And she goes back. She can't help it. Her tempestuous self kind of bursts forth again, and she gets just...
Now I was left in my natural element and beginning to feel the stirrings of old emotions.
Yes. So Helen's gone and Miss Temple's gone, and therefore she is free again to just have all of her emotions and be that extreme child into adult that she is now.
Now I remember that the real world was wide, and that a varied field of hopes and fears, of sensations and excitements awaited those who had courage to go forth into its expanse to seek real knowledge of life amidst its perils. So that what she had been feeling as a child, being cooped up and bound in by the places and the rules of Gateshead and then Lowood. And that's coming back to her now. And then she goes out, and that part where she looks out and sees the prison, sees it as a prison ground and exile limits. There's that white road. I trace the white road winding round the base of one mountain and vanishing in a gorge between two. How I long to follow it further. That it's the promise of the follow the white road, because that's what she had as a child, that longing for remembering adventures, going other places. That's why Lowood was so exciting for her to start with, even though she has to go as when she's so small and it's dark, but the idea that I'm going someplace else, she liked that idea. It's got to be better than Gateshead, is that what she's thinking.
What was it? Is it? I think they're just both as bad as each other, really, aren't they?
She has Helen. She has Helen at Gateshead, and she has Miss Temple, and they're both So for those two people alone, and especially Helen, and now Marianne Wilson, it is infinitely better than the loneliness of Gateshead. So even with her change in relationship with Bessie at the very end there at Gateshead, that's still not going to be enough, I think, to sustain Jane and what she really needs in other people and being connected to them.
Yeah.
So she realizes that she can leave. And the she's now suddenly that Miss Temple's gone, she's tired of the routine. I desired liberty. For liberty, I gasped. For liberty, I uttered a prayer. It seems scattered on the wind when faintly blowing. But then the answer is, grant me at least a new servitude. And then she'll come back to it, a new servitude. And she defines what she means by that, but and literally tells us that, like, I know. It's not really like liberty. Like, it's not that exciting, but it's what I need. What do you think about her desire for new servitude?
It's because it's all she's ever known.
Yeah.
Right? So all through Gateshead, all through Lowood, she desires liberty, change, stimulus, new servitude. Then it's liberty, excitement, enjoyment, new servitude. You can just see her dreams shrink down to reality. Yeah. Just the way those, like, it just narrows down because that's all she had experience of. It's all like options for women at this time. So
she settles for what she can get. You know? Yeah.
I mean, but that's the reality as well. Like, she knows realistically, if she wants to get out, there are not many professions for women at this time. You know, teacher, governess, you'd be very lucky. You'd have to be very middle class, to be a writer and support yourself through writing. That's kind of out of her field. It's basically teaching and governessing, is how to make her money. So she does become much more realistic. She goes from the the dream into the reality.
Servitude is a matter of fact, she says. This is a matter of fact. This is what is feasible, that I can do. Is this also, in a sense, her learning Helen's doctrine of endurance? That,
I think it's in there, isn't it? Like, she feels like she knows her place. Like, this is how she endures. This is how she's going to get out. But then she knows she's moving to a new servitude. It will be a new endurance. Just obviously not in the way she quite expects it will be. But yeah, definitely. This is her understanding what Helen has told her and linking that to the reality of her life and expectations.
Well, this is something I want to make sure I remember in the future then, because, I think it is, she wants to be very practical and very, this is the world that I have to deal with, and this is what I have to do to be happy in it. And yet she still pushes against the boundaries and demands, that's what I want to look at, how she will continue through this novel to then push those boundaries and demand that the place suit her instead of letting the place control her. So
that's what obviously happens at Thornfield. Yeah, but she's not there yet. She's still not experienced in the world. She's gone from a home to a school. This is why she wants to go out into the world, isn't it? And she thinks, it's going to be kind of brighter, new opportunities, at least, even if it's still the same kind of servitude, just in a new situation.
Tracy had a nice note to us to remember later, too, referring to the word inmate. In chapter 13, Rochester will say to Jane, "Excuse my tone of command. I am used to say, do this, and it is done. I cannot alter my customary habits for one new inmate." And, that word must have really grated on Jane when he says it. So that she is an inmate still. But we'll get to that later. How is she going to escape Lowood? Well, she has no friends, so she has to do it herself. And even if it's in her mind, a kind fairy in my absence had surely dropped the required suggestion on my pillow. Yeah, I mean, this is her, fantasifying how she, thinks of it. She must advertise. And her advertisement is: a young lady accustomed to tuition is desirous of meeting with a situation in a private family where the children are under 14. She is qualified to teach the usual branches of a good English education, together with French drawing and music. Address J.E. Post Office, Loughton, Blankshire, where she is. So,
but this is so fantastic, right? Because this is Jane putting herself out there for the first time. She's not read. I mean, we don't get a sense of newspapers coming into the school. She's not read an advertisement in a newspaper and thinks, yes, I can suit that role. She herself is putting herself out there. This is me. Take me as I am. Like, this is a powerful move for Jane, putting herself out there. And then she realizes the risks, because anybody could respond. So, you know, it is flagging here the kind of realities for governesses as well. Like, you know, anybody could put an ad to call for a governess, but anybody can also kind of, you know, answer an ad that you put yourself. So she is aware of the risks and the realities for a single woman on the move.
And takes them, and she finally gets a response, but it's only one response she gets. And if J.E., who advertised in the Blankshire Herald of last Thursday, possesses the acquirements mentioned, and if she is in a position to give satisfactory references as to character and competency, a situation can be offered her where there is but one pupil, a little girl under 10 years of age, and where the salary is £30 per annum. J.E. is requested to send references, name, address, and all particulars to the direction Mrs. Fairfax, Thornfield, near Millcote in Blankshire. Somebody asked what's up with the line "sure" in the novel that we don't situate it. And this is a convention in novels in the 18th and 19th century. Right, that it's, you know, it's I can't tell you where it is really. But it's, you know, it's a fill in the blank kind of thing. It could be anywhere. So, and then it enables us to figure out where it is. So,
yeah, and it's kind of one of those, like, you can fill in the blank yourself, because you will probably likely know of somewhere. Yeah. It like this situation. I think that authors didn't used to want to limit themselves sometimes. Like, I don't want it to just be this one particular place. And yet they felt like they didn't want to make up a place that doesn't exist, that might draw people to say, like, what, there's no such thing as a Edshire, like, what are you talking about? It is very much a convention for whoever asked that question in the 19th century novels to do this. So, and years sometimes get that, and then they'll drop off the last couple dates of the year, so you don't know when it is. But Mrs. Fairfax, she imagines, in her black gown and widow's cap, frigid perhaps, but not uncivil, a model of elderly English respectability. And Thornfield, that doubtless was the name of her house, a neat, orderly spot, I was sure. You know, we'll see what happens, you know, to these, you know, fantasies of what this is going to be like. I love this over analysis of the letter. You know, every she pores over every deed. She's just so excited, trying to figure out exactly what will come, because she kind of analyzes the place as well, right? Like, oh, she looks it up on the map, and oh, that's closer to London than where I am now. Hopefully it's going to be busier. You know, that she longs to go where there's life and movement. It's going to be a busy enough place, doubtless. Like, she's got all of these kind of dreams based on, like, how she's analyzed this letter about how her life could be at this new place. And again, I think that's a really, really nice kind of, you can reflect on what Jane wants at this point and the kind of aspirations that she has. And that's hope. It's following the white road, and it's a very hopeful outlook that things will be better out there. And that's what she's looking for. But first she Mr. Brocklehurst has to say yes, and then he actually says that Mrs. Reed must be written to, as she was my natural guardian. And a reminder to us too that even though Jane Eyre's 18, that's not age of consent. 21 would have been age of consent, so that she can do what she wants. And even then, they still would have said, "Well, you have to have Mrs. Reed," and she needs references. She doesn't need anybody to write a nasty letter about her. She better follow the rules if she wants to get this position.
And Mrs. Reed says, I might do as I pleased. She had long relinquished all interference in my affairs, as we know.
That's it. Hands wiped.
Yeah.
We have done with her.
Well, let's get to this last bit here. We're running a little over because Bessie shows up out of the blue. She's going to take this position. She has permission to do it, and she's about to leave. And Bessie shows up, and you've quite forgot me, I think, Miss Jane. In another second, I was embracing and kissing her rapturously. Bessie, Bessie, Bessie. That was all I said. And we had this discussion early on in the series that some people were, Bessie's not nice. Why is she so attached to her? Is it nostalgia for Jane that she finds somebody to, she's rapturously kissing her?
Yeah. I mean, but a friendly face as well. Like, I know the school situation has improved, but she's lost Helen, she's lost Mrs. Temple. So this is a friendly face from her past that she can reconnect with. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important. It seems quite out of the blue to have Bessie just suddenly return and talk about her family and that, she's married with kids. But for Jane, this is a really nice way to kind of say goodbye to her childhood completely. Like, say goodbye to Gateshead, say goodbye to Lowood, and put all of this behind her. And again, we have, we get to see, it's a way of like tying off the ends of the other characters as well. It's a nice, neat narrative strategy so that what happens to the other people in Jane's life as well. So it's a really good way to round everything off.
As Bessie tells us, she tells the Reed children aren't doing well. The girls are still bickering and fighting. They lead a cat and dog life together. The one of them stopped the marriage to a lord, a secret, and John is, of course, has grown into, a horrible adult, as he was a horrible child, dissipated. They will never make much of him. He has such thick lips, she says, which I think is a hint at his kind of sensuality, his nature. This is physiognomy here, and that, you would have been very, someone addicted to pleasures would have, thick lips. So
definitely not a good sign.
Yeah.
But I do, and I think there's a kind of, for me, there's a Jane Austen vibe to these, how the characters have grown up. So like we've got the wayward people, they've gone on. So Georgiana made to run away. I think there's a kind of Pride and Prejudice kind of influence coming in here. They've kind of grown up like dissipated and like, running off with Wickham and that kind of thing. So I think it's just a little hint there. Of a Jane Austen kind of runaway kind of family. They've all gone to
for us, for the readers, because Charlotte hasn't read Jane Austen yet. So,
but there's a hint there for me that there's just some linkages.
And so Bessie gives her that, and then Bessie, she says, I've long wanted to see you, and know that you're, and then she kind of, we get Bessie wants this kind of assessment of how Jane is made out in her life, but this is a good moment for Jane. I think Jane wants to provide this assessment that, like, look how well I've turned out, kind of thing, and she gets to do this. She gets to kind of perform. She plays music. She talks about her art, and it is, Jane's way of saying, I turned out okay. And Bessie is like, oh my gosh, you're actually a lady, unlike the Reed children. And this is one of the lessons that Bessie has to learn. Had to learn earlier that, that just because they were the gentry children didn't make them better than Jane.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I just love how frank they are with each other as well. Like, like this is a good friendship that stood the test of time. Oh, you were no beauty as a child. And I smiled at Bessie's frank answer, and I felt it was correct. But, I was a bit like, oh, that's a shame. But this is true friendship, right? You just say it as it is.
Bessie's giving an honest appraisal, and this is what Jane does the whole novel. Will talk about herself in very honest ways, like, I'm small, I'm plain. That's who she is. It's why most movies always seem to like it. Like, she's always beautiful in a movie, and it is so. I mean, that's such a subjective thing, but I never see it's. almost never are. I can't even think of one adaptations where they really go for a plain Jane.
Well, I'm just going to sound like I'm dissing her now, but I really like the TV adaptation with Patrick Fassbender and Ruth Wilson. I think she's as plain as Hollywood,
as plain as somebody's going to
Jane.
be, and a successful, actor.
But she's as plain. This is what I mean. I think it's as plain as Hollywood and TV is going to get.
So, and you don't want to say like, oh, this person's not very good looking. It's just, she should be. I like the difficulty in casting that, in a sense, I would think. But Jane has no issues with her looks, it seems. Or does she? And she's not. And this, I don't know. Well, that's something we'll talk about later, especially at Thornfield, comparing herself to Blanche Ingram. But Bessie and her are just, they can say these things, and it's a sign of their, of their closeness, of their, that Bessie can tell her this, and it's okay. But then she has this other little story too that'll come up in the future, that a Mr. Eyre came to Gateshead and wanted to see you, and Mrs. said you were at school 50 miles off. He seemed so much disappointed, for he could not stay. He was going on a voyage to a foreign country, which is Madeira, it turns out. And that'll come into play later in the novel. So,
it's a great hint, right? Like, we've got, because Madeira at the time's like, well, it was occupied after the Napoleonic Wars by Britain. There's a hint that he might be a wine merchant. So we might get some nouveau riche ideas coming in here, and it's just quick and gone. That's Mrs. Reed
was very high with him. She called him afterwards a sneaking tradesman. Of course, she's going to be rude. But she sends him off, and this will have ramifications later. And that's it. They part, and I mounted the vehicle, which was to bear me to new duties and a new life in the unknown environs of Millcote.
I think this is really quite scenic the way it's done, like, because you can see Bessie goes one way.
Read that whole paragraph then.
The other.
Read that paragraph.
Oh, the whole paragraph, yeah. Bessie, I conversed about old times an hour longer, and then she was obliged to leave me. I saw her again for a few minutes the next morning at Lowtown while I was waiting for the coach. We parted finally at the door of the Brocklehurst Arms there. Each went our separate way. She set off for the brow of Lowood Fell to meet the conveyance which would take her back to Gateshead. I mounted the vehicle which was to bear me to new duties and a new life in the unknown environs of Millcote. It's just a really beautiful, like, final scene where they just kind of part their separate ways. They go in opposite directions. Like, Jane's mounted, she's going up, and that's kind of over the fell and down.
Yeah.
Like, it's just very, if you're looking at the adaptations, it's very kind of visual, the way they kind of separate.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Great. All righty. And that's where it ends. And next week we'll get to Thornfield finally, or 2 weeks. We'll get to Thornfield. Brontosaurs and Airheads, thank you all for tuning in today. We'll post this recording on our website. If you are watching that recording now or on YouTube, thanks for watching. We have a Sundays with Jane Eyre Facebook group where we continue the conversation. Look us up on Facebook and join in that conversation. We can also go to the Rosenbach's YouTube account and like the Jane Eyre videos, subscribe to the channel, and leave comments there as well. Thanks to our chat, Mrs. Fairfax today, Brianna. Thank you so much, Brianna, for managing the links in the chat. We'll be off next week for Halloween. Everybody have a very happy Halloween. I hope you enjoy it. And then we'll return on November 7th when my co-host will be Finola Austin, author of Bronte's Mistress, a wonderful novel here. We'll be covering a single chapter too, just chapter 11, in which Jane arrives at Thornfield, meets Mrs. Fairfax and Adele, and hears a strange laughter in the house. Is it a ghost? Which she'll ask. And that'll be a lot of fun. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, everyone head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out the other virtual offerings we have, including our gallery gateways and exhibitions. The Rosenbach is also open to visit. See our website for how we're making it safe for you to come and see our exhibition and historic house in person. And please support the Rosenbach, which you can do by donation We're asking for donations of $18.47 to support the show. If you donate any amount at all, I'll read your name at the mid-break. Any donation is welcome. And if you're not already a member, I invite you to join. Janine, thank you for being here today.
No, thank you for inviting me. I've loved it.
Good. This is great. I'm sorry your clock didn't chime. So that would have been great if we had, because we would have had it in the middle too. So, but yeah. You need to look into that. There's something wrong with this clock. It's not chiming. So
I think it's very loud, which is why it's been turned off.
All righty. Well, thank you for elucidating this novel with us. This was a lot of fun. I hope you can come back in the spring. I would love to have you again.
Definitely. I'll be here.
Great. All right, everyone. Playing us out over the credits will be Pleated Gazelle's Secrets song. Farewell, readers. May you live entirely for and with what you love best on earth. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye, everyone.